It starts, I think, with a Christmas card, our first one as a married couple. My wife Sarah was so excited to send them out. We picked a nice photo of us from our honeymoon smiling on a beach. When her mother Alina got hers, she called not to say it was nice, no. She said it's a lovely photo of Sarah. It's a shame the light was so harsh on you, dear, you look quite tired. That was the first one, the first little pinprick. You learn to brush those off, you have to. Then it was the family vacations. They'd plan a whole trip to a lake house a full week. And they'd forget to include the dates in the initial email chain. When Sarah would call them on it, her father Robert would just chuckle, this dry, dismissive chuckle. "Oh, we didn't think you'd be able to get the time off work," he'd say, looking right at me. "We know how demanding your field can be. My field is graphic design. I'm a freelancer to them. That's not a career, it's a hobby." And instability proof that their daughter had married beneath. We walked into the oak room, and it was everything I expected. Dark wood, soft lighting, the clink of fine silverware. There was a hushed reverence to the place. We were led to the best table in the house, right in the center of the main dining room. A large round table already set for 7. Except when we got there I saw it immediately. There were only 6 chairs. Robert and Alina were already seated along with Sarah's brother, his wife, and their adult daughter. One empty chair remained between the daughter and Robert. Invitation was a deliberate slap in the face. A group text from his sister outlining plans for his father's birthday dinner at that very restaurant. And then a private message to me saying, "Just so you know, we think it's best if Michael doesn't come. You know how stressed Dad gets around him. It's better for everyone." The audacity took my breath away. Better for everyone. It was better for their fragile egos, for their curated image of a perfect family that had no room for the son they deemed a failure. I showed the message to Michael. I watched his face fall, that familiar resignation settling in. But this time I didn't just comfort him, I ignited. "No," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You are going, we are going, and we are going to hold our heads high." He tried to protest, to spare me the discomfort. But I was immovable. "Trust me," I whispered, cupping his face in my hands. "Just this once, let me handle everything. All you have to do is be by my side." Walking into that restaurant was like walking into a courtroom, where we were already presumed guilty. The maitre d' led us to their usual round table, in the center of the dining room. Their conversation died the moment we approached. His mother offered a cold, brittle smile. "Oh, Michael, we weren't sure you'd make it." His father gave a curt nod, his attention already returning to his other son, the golden child, who was animatedly discussing his latest promotion. We took our seats at the 2 chairs they'd clearly added as an afterthought. The entire meal was a masterclass in subtle cruelty. They asked my husband superficial questions about his job, only to immediately turn and discuss real careers. With his brother they marveled at the wine list, pointing out bottles that cost more than our first car, making a show of their own sophistication. Through it all I kept my hand on Michael's knee under the table. I could feel the tension in his leg, the subtle tremor. "Id, give a gentle squeeze, a silent reminder, I am here. This ends tonight." When the plates were cleared, the performance reached its peak. His father summoned the waiter with a flourish and ordered a round of 30-year-old port for the entire table, a final unspoken flex of financial superiority. The check arrived on a silver platter, placed discreetly near the head of the table. His father reached for it with a smug, paternalistic air, ready to play the benevolent patriarch. That's when I moved. I didn't reach for the check. Instead, I caught the eye of the head waiter, a man named Charles, with whom Id had a very private conversation just an hour earlier. I gave him the slightest of nods. He understood immediately. Charles walked over, his demeanor shifting from polite service to one of deep respect. He didn't look at me. He bypassed his father entirely. He stopped directly beside my husband's chair and gave a small formal bow. "Sir," he said, his voice clear and carrying in the sudden lull at the table, "the check has been taken care of. The owner's meal is always on the house. And might I say, it is an honor to have you dining with us this evening." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. His father's hand was still frozen in the air halfway to the silver platter. His mother's mouth was slightly agape. Michael looked just as stunned as they did. He turned to me, his eyes wide with confusion. I simply smiled, reached into my purse, and slid a small velvet box across the table to him. Inside was a single key and a note that read, "Happy anniversary. This is yours. You've always been the most successful man I know." The look on his face, it wasn't just shock, it was a dawning, overwhelming wave of realization of the secret Id kept, the lengths Id gone to, and the absolute unshakable faith I had in him, the hurt that had lived in his eyes for a decade, began to melt away, replaced by a brightness I hadn't seen since we first met. He looked from the key to me, and a single grateful tear traced a path down his cheek. He wasn't looking at his family, he was only looking at me in that moment. The power in the room. There was no chair for me. Didn't just shift, it shattered and reformed entirely around him. The person they had spent years diminishing was in fact the one who held the deed to the very temple of their status. Their wealth was just money, his was a restaurant and institution, a symbol of everything they valued. And it belonged to him. But more than that, he had something they would never understand, a love that would buy a damn restaurant, just to prove a point, a love that saw his pain, and built a fortress around his heart. They didn't know what to say, there were no clever remarks, no backhanded compliments, just a sputtering, embarrassed silence. They were defeated not by a louder argument or a bigger bank account, but by the sheer, undeniable power of being loved so completely. We stood up to leave. Michael held the key clenched tight in his fist as we walked out. Charles bowed again and said, "Good night, sir. We look forward to your next visit." We didn't look back at the table. We didn't need to. The victory wasn't in their regret. It was in the way Michael held my hand, his grip firm, and sure, for the first time in years, it was in the way he walked, his shoulders straight, his head held high. The greatest revenge wasn't their humiliation. It was his liberation. It was the quiet knowledge that while they were left with nothing but the bitter taste of their own prejudice, we were walking into the rest of our lives, bound by a love that had just proven it could move mountains, or at the very least buy a famous restaurant to make a point, and that was worth more than any victory lap. Alright, so picture the scene. You know my in-laws, right? I've described them before, but tonight they were in their absolute element. The family dinner from hell, capital F, capital D, capital H. We're talking about Brenda and Robert, my wife's parents. Brenda's wearing a pearl necklace, so tight it looks like it's slowly strangling her. And Robert has on a blazer with crests on it, crests plural. I am pretty sure one of them is from a country club that doesn't actually exist. They'd been building up to this dinner for weeks. Brenda would call my wife Sarah, and in this hushed, reverent tone, she'd say things like Robert had to call in a favor with the maitre d'. You know, Philippe's such a dear, he owes Robert ever since that business with the sommelier. What business? I have no idea. Probably that Robert sent a bottle of wine back because the label was too bold a font. They live for this stuff. The name dropping, the implication that they're just swimming in a sea of exclusivity that the rest of us can only dream of. So we're all meeting at this restaurant, Le Bourgeois, Lapin, the fancy rabbit. I'm not kidding. Sarah told me to at least wear a button-down shirt, so I did. I even ironed it. But standing outside this place with its doors made of dark, heavy wood, and a guy out front who looked like a retired Secret Service agent, I felt my shirt immediately start to wilt. It knew it was out of its league. Walking in was like entering a museum where everything is beige, and you're afraid to breathe too loud. The carpets were so thick our footsteps just vanished. Brenda and Robert were already there, perched on these tiny velvet chairs, like two regal birds. They did the whole cheek-kissing thing with Sarah, and then Robert gave me a handshake that was less hello and more I am assessing your grip strength for weakness. Brenda leaned in. We're at the best table, Robert insisted. Robert puffed out his chest. A little one must be seen, he murmured, as if he'd just revealed a profound, universal truth. There was a moment of perfect, awkward silence. Robert looked up, a faint smile on his face. Eleanor busied herself with her napkin. Sarah's brother just stared at his plate. Sarah was the one who broke the silence. Mom, Dad, there's no seat for Ben. And then we get to the table, which brings me to part 2. The great seat snubbed. The table was a round one, supposedly, but the way the chairs were arranged, it was more like a crescent moon, with 3 chairs having a prime view of the entire restaurant, and one chair, my chair, facing directly into a swinging door that led to the kitchen. I am talking a full-in saloon-style door with little circular windows in it. Every time it swung open, I got a blast of heat and a chorus of clanging pans and shouted French swear words. Brenda gestured with a wave of her hand. Oh, Mike, you don't mind, do you? We thought you'd appreciate the activity, she said, activity like it was a contagious disease. Sarah shot me an apologetic look, but I just grinned. Are you kidding? This is the VIP seat. I feel like I am backstage at a Broadway show. Robert's smile was so thin it could have cut paper. The comedy of errors began almost immediately. A waiter rushing out with a tray full of what looked like tiny food sculptures hit the door a little too hard. It swung right into the back of my chair, and a glass of water on his tray did a perfect little somersault and landed in my lap. Not a lot, just a splash, But enough. Brenda gasped like I'd been shot. Robert sighed a long suffering sound. Oh dear, clumsy. The waiter was mortified, apologizing profusely. I just waved him off. It's fine, really, it's a hot night. Evaporative cooling. I tried to catch Sarah's eye to share a laugh, but she was staring intently at her napkin. Then the ordering started. Brenda ordered for everyone, speaking in this low conspiratorial tone. To the waiter, well, start with the foie gras. But tell Jacques it must be the Strasbourg, not the Perigord. Hell, understand. The waiter nodded gravely, as if she'd just given him the nuclear codes. He gets to me, and for you, sir. Before I could open my mouth, Brenda leaned forward. Mike, we'll have the let's see the roasted chicken. It's very straightforward, she said. Straightforward, the way you might say inedible. I looked at the waiter, then back at Brenda. I smiled. You know what, I am actually craving something different. Do you think the kitchen could make me a cheeseburger, like a really good one, with fries, extra crispy fries? The silence that fell was heavier than the restaurant's velvet curtains. Robert actually choked on his mineral water. Brenda's smile was frozen, a rictus of horror. The waiter blinked. A burger, sir. Robert cleared his throat. He looked at me, not with malice, but with a kind of bland dismissal, like I was a piece of furniture that had been delivered by mistake. Ah, Benjamin, yes. We assumed, well, with the last-minute confirmation. And the table being so tight, we assumed you wouldn't mind sitting elsewhere. There's a lovely little two-top, just over there, by the kitchen door. We've already arranged it. Yeah, you know, ground beef, bun, cheese, the whole deal, if it's not too much trouble. I winked at him. He looked like I'd asked him to wrestle. I will have to consult with the chef, he stammered, and fled through the kitchen doors, which smacked me in the chair again. The rest of the meal was a masterclass in awkwardness. Brenda and Robert talked exclusively to Sarah about people I didn't know, the Wainwrights, and their yacht troubles, the Hendersons' disappointing son, who became a teacher. Every time I tried to add something like, hey, teachers are great, there would be a pause. And then they'd just continue, as if I'd made a small insignificant noise like a mouse squeaking. I just leaned back, enjoyed the heat from the kitchen, and watched the show. The food came. My burger was a work of art, honestly. It had a fancy pickle on the side, and everything. Brenda eyed it like it was a dead rodent on her fine china. Finally, after what felt like 3 years, we got to the dessert and coffee stage. Robert made a big show of catching the waiter's eye and miming a little scribble in the air. The check was coming. This was their moment, the grand finale of their performance. The check arrived on a silver platter, which I thought was a nice touch. Robert produced his credit card. It was one of those heavy black metal ones and placed it on the platter with a definitive clink. He looked around the table, a king bestowing a gift upon his subjects. Our treat, of course. The waiter picked up the platter and vanished. We sat there sipping our coffee. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Robert started to look a little uneasy. Brenda was craning her neck, trying to see where the waiter had gone. Then we saw him. He was over by the maitre d' stand having a hushed, frantic conversation with the manager. A lot of hand gestures. The manager's eyes went wide. He looked over toward our table. He looked directly at me. He started walking over, and he looked pale. Robert puffed up, ready to receive an apology for the delay. The manager stopped, gave a little bow, and said, Mr. and Mrs. Kensington, my most sincere apologies for the misunderstanding. Robert waved a magnanimous hand. Quite all right, my good man, these things happen. But the manager wasn't looking at Robert anymore. He turned to me. His face was a mixture of pure terror and utmost respect. Mr. Johnson, we are so dreadfully sorry. We did not realize you were dining with us tonight. There has been a terrible error. The table went silent. I could hear the ice melting in Robert's water glass. I looked where he gestured. There was indeed a very small table crammed next to a swinging door, where waiters were constantly emerging with trays. It was like a table for a child, the ultimate snub, not just exclusion, but a deliberate public demotion. I felt my face grow hot. I saw the look in Sarah's eyes, a mixture of fury and humiliation. She opened her mouth to say something, probably to call the whole thing off, to drag us out of there. The manager continued, his voice trembling slightly. The entire meal, of course, is complimentary, with our deepest apologies. Please, if there is anything at all we can do. Brenda's mouth was hanging open. Robert's credit card was still sitting on the silver platter, looking suddenly very small and insignificant. I took a slow sip of my water. I set the glass down. I looked at the manager, then at my in-laws, I gave a little shrug. Oh right, that I forgot to mention it. I bought this place last month, wanted to see how things were running. The fries are great, huh, really crispy. The color drained from Brenda's face. Robert looked like he was trying to swallow a lemon whole. Sarah was staring at me, her eyes wide, a slow smile spreading across her face. She had no idea either. The manager was still bowing. Would you care for a tour, Mr. Johnson? Perhaps a digestif? Now I think we're good, I said, standing up. I looked at the remains of my burger. You know what wrapped that up for me? Leftovers are the best part. I turned to Brenda and Robert, who were still rooted to their chairs, paralyzed by a mixture of shock and utter humiliation. Can I get you guys a doggy bag? I hear the foie gras reheats surprisingly well. We walked out of there, me carrying a little Le Bourgeois Lapin branded bag with my half-eaten burger in it. Robert was silent the entire way to the car. Brenda was making little gasping sounds like a fish out of water. Sarah waited until we were out of earshot. Then she burst out laughing, hooking her arm in mine. You bought the restaurant, she whispered. Yep, I said, the quiet one at the table. Yeah, you should never underestimate that guy. And as we walked away into the night, I didn't even need to look back to know that the expression on their faces was a story I would be telling for the rest of my life. You asked them to name the hottest new restaurant in the city. You were so excited to tell me where we were going, a place you'd read about in a magazine, a place that was impossible to get into. You didn't see my smile, the private little joke I kept to myself, as I put on the only suit I own. Because I knew the place, I knew the smell of the polish on the copper pans in the kitchen. I knew the exact number of steps from the walk-in freezer to the main prep station. I knew which floorboard near the hostess stand creaks if you step on it just right. I knew it all. But something in me shifted. That simmering determination, the one I'd kept on a low boil for a decade, finally reached its point. I put a hand on Sarah's arm. I gave her a small, calm smile. It's fine, honey, really, it's your parents' night. I don't mind. The relief on their faces was palpable. They thought they'd won. They thought I was just rolling over, accepting my place. I looked right at Robert. I hope you all have a wonderful celebration. But I didn't say anything. I just let you all talk. I listened to your father talk about the vision you have to build something like this. I listened to your mother compliment the minimalist decor, the exposed brick, the kind of sophisticated elegance that you just can't fake, and I just nodded. I've gotten very good at nodding. This suit felt strange. It's a good suit. I bought it for this night. But the wool was scratchy compared to the soft, worn cotton of the kitchen whites I've lived in for the better part of a decade, sitting in this plush velvet chair, with the low light from the delicate filament bulbs glowing overhead. I felt like an imposter, a dishwasher playing dress-up, and I could see that's exactly what your parents still saw. I remember the first time I met them. I came straight from my shift, my knuckles still raw from the bleach in the sink, water, the smell of old grease clinging to my clothes. Your mother's hug was stiff. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Your father's handshake was quick, like he was afraid some of the dish pit might rub off on him. Over a dinner they paid for at a stuffy old steakhouse, they asked me about my prospects. I told them I was learning the restaurant business from the ground up. Your father chuckled, not unkindly, but in a way that said he thought it was a cute little phase, a noble trade. He said, like he was talking about a blacksmith from the Middle Ages. But surely you have aspirations beyond the kitchen. Sarah deserves a certain stability. And Sarah, you defended me. You always did. You told them about my work ethic, about the night classes I was taking in business management. But I could see the worry in your eyes too, a flicker of doubt, when your mother would later pull you aside and ask in that quiet, concerned voice if you were really sure about me, if you weren't settling. Those words, settling, they became a ghost in our apartment. They lingered in the air when I'd come home at 2 in the morning, my body aching, my mind numb from balancing inventory spreadsheets after a 10-hour shift. There were nights I'd just sit on the floor in our dark kitchen, too tired to even make it to the bedroom. And I'd wonder if they were right, if this was all a foolish dream, if I was just a dishwasher who was too stubborn to admit he belonged at the sink. The saving grace was Leo, the old head chef at Giovanni's. He saw something in me, or maybe he just saw someone who wasn't afraid to scrub a burnt pot until it shined. He started teaching me things, not just how to chiffonade basil or properly sear a scallop, but real things: how to source produce, how to manage food costs, how to spot a supplier who was trying to cheat you. He was the one who told me about this place, this old failing bistro that was up for sale. It was a money pit, he said, a disaster. But he saw the same bones I did. Getting the loan was a nightmare. I must have been rejected by a dozen banks. My credit was a joke. My collateral was a 10-year-old car. And a collection of chef's knives. Your father, when he found out I was trying, sat me down. He offered me a loan himself. It was a generous offer. But it came with conditions: a seat on a board. I didn't have a say in how I ran a business that didn't exist, yet it was a way to keep me under his thumb, to make my success. If it ever came a product of his generosity, I thanked him, but I said no. The look on his face was one of pure, uncomprehending pity. He thought I was too proud. He didn't understand that it was the only thing I had that was truly mine. I walked over to my little table. By the kitchen I could feel the eyes of the other diners on me, the pitying looks. The man who wasn't important enough to sit with the family. I pulled out the chair and sat down, and I waited. So I did it the hard way. I worked double shifts for 2 years straight. I saved every penny. I lived on family meal and day-old bread from the bakery down the street. I presented a business plan to a small local investor who cared more about passion than perfect credit. And I bought this place, this beautiful broken-down place. And I rebuilt it. I stripped the old varnish from this very bar. I helped lay the new tile in the dining room. I was here when they poured the foundation for the new patio. There isn't a square inch of this building that doesn't have my sweat in it. And yet, sitting here tonight, I was that kid in the dish pit again. Your father was holding court, swirling his expensive red wine. Success, he was saying, is about leverage. It's about positioning. You have to be seen in the right places, know the right people. It's not just about hard work. That's a myth they sell to the people who do the hard work. He gestured around the room. The man who owns this place, he gets it. He understood the assignment. He created an experience. Your mother nodded, reaching over to pat my hand. You're still so young, dear. There's plenty of time to find your path. Maybe you could talk to Charles' friend at the firm. They always need reliable hands in the mailroom. And I just took it. I looked at you, Sarah, and you gave me a small, pained smile. You were embarrassed for me. I could see it. And in that moment, a part of me wanted to scream, to stand up and tell them everything. But another part, a stronger part, just felt calm, a deep, solid peace. Their words couldn't touch me anymore. They were just sounds, echoes from a world that no longer had any power over me. That's when Marco spotted me. Marco, who I hired 6 months ago, after he lost his job. He was threading his way through the tables, his server's uniform crisp and sharp. He had a tray balanced on his fingertips. But his eyes were fixed on me. A huge, genuine grin spread across his face. He didn't see the in-laws, he didn't see the fancy suits, he just saw me. He came right up to our table, ignoring everyone else, his voice warm and full of honest delight. Hey boss, I didn't know you were coming in tonight. Everything okay? The risotto special is killing it. We're almost out. The world didn't stop. The other conversations in the room kept going. But at our table, the silence was absolute. It was a physical thing, thick and heavy. Your father's wine glass was frozen halfway to his lips. Your mother's hand was still resting on mine, but it had gone cold and stiff. I looked at Marco and smiled. Everything's perfect, Marco. Thank you. The table is enjoying everything. He gave a quick, happy nod. Awesome. Can I get you another drink? On the house, of course. He winked, then turned and glided back towards the kitchen, leaving behind a crater of silence. What happened next was interesting. The service at my little table was impeccable. A young waiter appeared instantly, placing a crisp linen napkin on my lap. He brought me a menu, not the regular menu, but the tasting menu with wine pairings. Compliments of the house, sir, he said quietly. I nodded across the room. I could see the main table. Their service was slow. They had to flag people down for water. Robert was getting visibly annoyed, snapping his fingers lightly to get a sommelier's attention. Your father slowly lowered his glass. He stared at me, his eyes scanning my face like he was seeing me for the very first time. The condescension was gone, the pity was gone. It was replaced by something I'd never seen in his eyes before: confusion. And then slowly, a dawning, staggering respect. He looked around the room again. But this time, he wasn't seeing an investment or a status symbol. He was seeing a creation. He was seeing my creation. Your mother pulled her hand back, as if my skin had burned her. She looked from me to you, and you were just beaming. All the embarrassment was gone, replaced by a pride so fierce it made your eyes shine. The victory wasn't in their shock. It wasn't in the sputtering, stumbling questions that followed. You're the owner. This is yours. That part was satisfying. Sure, a tiny human part of me enjoyed it. But the real victory was the quiet certainty I felt in my own heart. It was the end of a long, lonely road. The ghost of settling that had lived in our home finally dissolved right there in the air between us. The conversation changed. After that it became tentative, respectful. Your father started asking real questions about overhead and gross margins. But I barely heard him. I was looking at you. And I realized I hadn't done it for them. I hadn't even done it to prove them wrong. I had done it for us, for the life I wanted to build with you. I had done it so that the next time your mother worried you were settling, you could look her in the eye without a flicker of doubt and say, "No, Mom, I won." They may never truly understand the weight of the journey. They'll probably always see the success, the restaurant, before they see the man who built it. But that's okay. Because I don't see the dishwasher anymore. When I look in the mirror, I see a man who built something with his own two hands. And that, more than any approval, more than any stunned silence from my in-laws, is everything. Thank you for that generous tip last time, Mrs. Abernathy. We don't forget kindness like that around here. It's a pleasure to see you again. And Mr. Davies, always a welcome face. Your usual table is ready. It's interesting that you asked for this specific table. It has a bit of a history. You see, this is the table where the idea was born, the plan. It was right here about 6 months ago that Carlos, our head waiter, slid a complimentary dessert over to me after a particularly rough lunch with your other guests. He just looked at me with that weary smile of his and said, "You have the patience of a saint." Those two are our 10:30 reservation next Saturday. And I just laughed a sad, tired laugh. Knew exactly what he meant. That's when the alliance was officially formed, the staff and me against a common enemy. You've always been so lovely to everyone here, so you probably don't see it. But they have a reputation, a real one, among the waitstaff at all the nice places in town, honestly. But especially here, their favorite spot. They love the prestige. But they treat the people serving them like part of the furniture. They'll snap their fingers. Instead of saying "excuse me," they send dishes back for the most trivial reasons. Soup is too hot, the steak is the wrong shade of pink, the ice in their water has too many bubbles. It's never about the food, it's about the performance, the need to feel important. I, on the other hand, was treated like royalty. Amusebouches appeared without me asking. My water glass was never less than half full. A different waiter, the head waiter himself, came to check on me. "Is everything to your satisfaction, Mr. Carter?" I just smiled and said it was perfect. I ordered the tasting menu. I took my time. I savored every bite. I watched the scene unfold at the other table like it was a play. Their food arrived late. Robert's steak was overcooked. They were clearly having a miserable. Carlos once told me about the time your father-in-law held a wine glass by the bowl, warming the Pinot Noir with his hands, then complained it was served at the wrong temperature, and demanded a new bottle. They comped it. Of course, the owner's policy is the customer is always right, even when they're spectacularly wrong. The tips, well, you know, a few dollars on a $300 bill. It's not even about the money, not really. It's the message it sends that their time is gold and ours is worthless. So that day at this table, we started talking, just venting at first. I told them about the comments at home, the constant critiques on my career, my family, the way we're raising the kids, the subtle digs that are just polite enough to deny if you call them on it. And Carlos, he listened. And he said, "You know, we see it all. We're invisible to people like that. We see the real them. And we see the real you." That's when the idea popped into my head. It was just a silly thought. What if I said we gave them an award? Carlos' eyes lit up. The rest of the staff, when they heard they were all in it, became our mission, a secret project for justice, served with a side of fries. We planned it for weeks. I made the reservation for tonight 2 months ago. We needed a Saturday, our busiest night, a full house for maximum visibility. I came in last Tuesday for a coffee, and we had a final briefing. Maria, the hostess, was going to greet them with an overly sweet, slightly sarcastic welcome. Ben, the sommelier, was going to recommend the most expensive bottle with a completely straight face, knowing they'd reject it for something cheaper, but then pretend they'd chosen it for its subtle notes. The kitchen staff were briefed to make the food absolutely perfect, flawless, so there would be no legitimate complaint. We wanted to remove all their usual excuses. We wanted their behavior to stand alone, naked and undeniable. When they walked in tonight, it was like watching a play where everyone knows their lines, except the two main characters. Maria laid it on thick. "Oh, the Abernathys. What an honor. We've been anticipating your visit," your mother-in-law preened, completely missing the edge in Maria's voice. "They were led to this very table," your father-in-law immediately complained. The tablecloth was creased. Carlos appeared as if by magic, smoothed it out with a flourish, and said, "My deepest apologies, Sir, well, have it pressed immediately after your departure. The look on his face was priceless. He'd been acknowledged, but somehow also mocked. He couldn't quite place it. The service was a masterpiece of subtle satire. The waiters were excessively polite, bowing slightly, using sir and madam. Every other word they brought extra bread, without being asked. Then whisked it away the second a crumb was dropped. They refilled water glasses. After every single sip, it was service, turned into a mild form of harassment. A constant polite intrusion, highlighting their every whim. They loved it, of course. They felt attended to, important. They didn't see the shared glances between the staff, the slight roll of Maria's eyes from her station by the door. They were the stars of their own movie, completely unaware the rest of the cast was in on a joke at their expense. The meal preceded the food, was as planned, exquisite. They could find no fault. They even seemed to be in a moderately good mood, basking in the attention that was crucial. We needed them comfortable, complacent. We needed the sting to be a complete surprise. The bill came to just over $400. Your father-in-law gestured for the check with a sigh, as if he were being personally inconvenienced by the need to pay for the luxury he'd just enjoyed. He pulled out his wallet, ready to leave his usual meager time, and I was having one of the best meals of my life, in solitude. Tip and be on his way, the king bestowing a pittance upon his subjects. But the check didn't come. Instead, Carlos approached the table again. He wasn't carrying a leather folder, he was carrying a small, elegantly framed certificate. The entire restaurant seemed to quieten. As if on cue, the other waitstaff subtly drifted closer. The busboys paused. This was the moment Carlos cleared his throat, not loudly, but with a resonance that carried. Mr. and Mrs. Abernathy, he began, his voice warm and formal, on behalf of the entire staff of the Gilded Spoon, we would like to take a moment to express our deep appreciation for your continued patronage. Your mother-in-law smiled a tight, proud little smile. She thought this was a genuine tribute over the years. Carlos continued, you have consistently provided us with a masterclass in exacting standards. Your feedback, while often creative, has certainly been memorable. The smile on her face began to falter. Your father-in-law shifted in his chair. Therefore, Carlos said, his voice rising just a notch, projecting across the room, it is our distinct privilege to present you with our inaugural, and we hope perennial, award. He turned the frame around. The text was beautifully calligraphed. It read, least favorite customers of the year, and underneath, in smaller print, proudly sponsored by the owner who has been serving your table this evening. Carlos gestured to me. I gave a little wave from my seat opposite them. The color drained from their faces. It was a truly spectacular sight. A deep, blotchy red crept up your father-in-law's neck. Your mother-in-law looked like she'd been slapped. The silence at the table was absolute, a tiny island of shock in the gentle hum of the restaurant. And then from the kitchen doorway came a single clear sound, a slow, deliberate round of applause. It was Antonio, the head chef, clapping. And then Maria joined in, and Ben, and soon the entire staff, everyone from the hostess to the dishwashers who had peeked out from the kitchen, were offering a soft, sustained applause. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was pointed. It was acknowledgement. The frame was placed gently on the table between them. Your father-in-law threw his napkin down. He stood up, sputtering, looking from me to Carlos, to the smiling faces of the staff. He had no words. What could he say? Complain about the award? Demand to speak to the owner? He'd just been told. He was looking at her. They were trapped by their own behavior, finally forced to see themselves through the eyes of the people they considered beneath them. They shuffled out, mumbling, leaving the framed award sitting alone on the tablecloth. They didn't even ask for the check. We comped the meal, of course. It was worth every penny. After they left the staff, and I shared a bottle of champagne. We laughed, we celebrated. It was a party of victory for basic human decency. Carlos said it best, clinking his glass with mine. Respect costs nothing, but a lack of it, well, sometimes it costs you your dignity. In a room full of people, they left you with a choice that night. They could reflect, change their ways, maybe even apologize, or they could continue to be the punchline to a joke they still don't fully hers. Finally, the evening was winding down. The main table was finished. Robert made a big show of catching the head waiter's eye, and gesturing for the check, he pulled out his platinum credit card, ready to pay for the whole extravagant affair, to once again establish his dominance as the patriarch. The provider, the head waiter, approached with a small silver tray. He placed it on the table. Robert put his card on it with a flourish. Understand, the ball, as they say, is in their court, but from what you've told me about their reaction, since I think we all know which path they chose, and honestly I am okay with that because here, at least they'll always be remembered, just not in the way they wanted. The quiet life I built for myself was my greatest achievement. It was a choice, you understand, a deliberate step away from the noise my family name. It's a heavy thing to carry, it opens doors certainly, but it also builds walls. People see the name first, and the person second. I wanted to be seen for me, just me, my husband David. He's the only one who knew, he understood. He saw the weight of it, the constant pressure of expectation that had followed me since childhood. We had a pact, a quiet understanding that our life, our love was separate from all that. It was our little fortress. David's family, though they live in a different world, a world of names and lineages of Hanos who and what family belonged. Hat Club, his mother Aliner, she has this way of speaking that's all soft edges and sharp points. Shall sigh over a piece of silverware and say, this pattern, it's lovely, but it's not sterling silver, of course, as if owning a set of sterling silver defined a person's soul. They have this endless fascination with old money, with establishment families, with a kind of refinement they believe is inherited, not earned. And they made their feelings about me perfectly clear, without ever saying it directly. I was pleasant, I was adequate, I came from, as Aliner once delicately put it, good simple stock. They tolerated me for David's sake. But there was always this underlying current of disappointment. They'd drop names at dinner parties, families with historic fortunes or famous ancestors, and then they'd look at me with this polite, pitying smile. Wouldn't it be wonderful, Aliner would muse, to have a connection to real legacy, to family that truly contributed something to the world? And David would squeeze my hand under the table, a silent apology, a shared burden. This particular dinner was supposed to be a celebration, an anniversary of sorts for David's parents. Aliner insisted we go to La Cuvée. It's the kind of restaurant that isn't just a place to eat, it's an institution. The walls are lined with black and white photographs of a different era. The linen is impossibly white, the crystal catches the light in a specific way. There's a reverence in the air. I felt it the moment I walked in, a familiar, almost painful tug of memory, the scent of reduced wine and fresh herbs, the specific sound of a professional kitchen, operating in perfect harmony. It was the smell and sound of my childhood. We were seated at a prime table. Aliner was in her element. This, she announced, gesturing around the room. This is what I mean by class, timeless. The Laurent family, the founders now, there was a dynasty. Perfection was their standard. They didn't just run a restaurant, they crafted an experience. She took a sip of her wine. It's a shame their line ended with them. No heirs to carry on the name, such a loss for the world. The waiter didn't pick it up. Instead he leaned in and said something. His voice was low, but in the quiet room it carried. I saw Robert's face freeze. The confident smile slipped away, replaced by utter confusion. He said something back. I couldn't hear what the waiter remained perfectly polite, but firm. He shook his head slightly. Then he said loud enough for the entire table, and probably the neighboring tables, to hear clearly, that won't be necessary, sir. The owner's meal is of course complimentary. David's father Robert nodded sagely. Indeed, a true legacy, unlike so many these days, who trade on borrowed prestige. His eyes flickered towards me for the briefest second. It was a habitual gesture, one I'd grown accustomed to, but tonight it felt different, sharper. The conversation continued, weaving through topics, but always circling back to La Cuvée, and the mythical Laurence. Aliner went on about the famous oyster dish, a secret recipe known only to the head chef. Robert lamented the lack of substantial families in our modern circle. We have no connection to anything with real history, he said, with a sigh that was meant to sound wistful, but landed with a thud of judgment. Nothing of true importance runs in our blood. And that was it. That was the moment. It wasn't anger that washed over me. It was a profound, chilling clarity. This secret I had carried, this part of my identity I had tucked away to protect myself, had become a cage. Their disrespect wasn't just for me, the person sitting across from them. It was for everything I came from. They were idolizing the very legacy they were in that moment. Insulting, they were mourning the end of a line that was sitting right in front of them, listening to them devalue my entire existence. The weight of the secret suddenly felt less like protection and more like a betrayal of my grandmother, who had built this place with her own hands, a betrayal of my own history. I looked at David. His jaw was tight, his knuckles white, as he gripped his fork. He was about to say something to defend me in some vague, polite way. I placed my hand gently on his arm and shook my head just slightly. This wasn't his battle to fight, this was mine. I took a slow, quiet breath, and caught the eye of the maître d', a tall, impeccably dressed man, who had been gliding between tables with serene authority. I raised my hand just enough. He approached with a polite professional smile. "Is everything to your satisfaction, madame?" My voice was low, calm, but it carried a new weight. "Everything is exquisite, thank you. Would it be possible to speak with Monsieur Gerard if he's available?" The maître d's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. His eyes narrowed just a touch, not with suspicion, but with a dawning recognition. Gerard wasn't a name on the menu. It was the name of the man who had been my grandfather's right hand, who had started as a busboy 70 years ago, and now in his 80s, still came in every day to oversee the dining room. He was the living memory of this place. Of course, madame," the maître d' said, his professional composure cracking. "One moment, please." He turned and walked away, his pace quicker than before. I saw him disappear through a door towards the kitchens. Elinor looked at me perplexed. "Is there a problem, dear? The food is lovely, I am sure. Whatever issue it is, they can handle it." She said it with the tone of someone who complains as a hobby. The silence that fell over their table was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Elinor's hand, which was reaching for her purse, stopped midair. Sarah's brother stared, his mouth slightly open. They all looked at the waiter. Then they followed his gaze. He was looking directly at me, and then he gestured gracefully in my direction, a simple, respectful nod of his head. "There's no issue," I said, my voice still quiet. "I just have a question." A few minutes past, the conversation at our table had died. The silence was thick and uncomfortable. Then the door to the kitchen swung open again, and there he was, Monsieur Gerard. He was older, of course, his hair a shock of white, his back a little stooped, but he moved with a quiet dignity. He was wearing the same uniform as the other waiters, but on him it looked like a suit of armor. His eyes scanned the room and landed on our table. The maître d' gestured towards me. Gerard walked over, his steps slow and deliberate. He stopped by my chair, and his eyes, a pale watery blue, studied my face. He looked past the polite dinner guest, past the woman trying to blend in. He was looking for something, and then his stern expression softened. A slow, warm smile spread across his weathered face, erasing decades of worry lines. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated recognition. "You have your grandmother's eyes," he said, his voice a low rumble, thick with emotion. "The same light in them, Madame Sophie. I would know you anywhere." He then turned to Elinor and Robert, who were staring utterly bewildered. He drew himself up to his full height, and his voice, though gentle, carried across our corner of the room with immense authority. "Madame, Monsieur," he said with a slight formal bow, "allow me to welcome you properly. This restaurant La Cuvée was founded by the Laurent family. This woman is the granddaughter of Sophie and Jean Laurent, the last direct descendant. We are deeply honored to be serving the owner of this house tonight." The silence that followed was absolute. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. I watched the color drain from Elinor's face, her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Robert stared at his plate, as if he'd never seen food before. The names they had been worshipping for the past hour, the legacy they lamented having no connection to, was mine. It had been mine all along. I looked from their stunned faces to the proud, beaming face of Monsieur Gerard, and finally to David, who had tears of relief and pride in his eyes. And in that moment, I didn't feel triumphant, I didn't feel vengeful. I felt whole. The fractured pieces of my identity, the public self and the private legacy, slid together seamlessly. The secret was gone, and in its place was a simple, profound truth. This name, this legacy, wasn't a burden to be hidden. It was a part of me, as intrinsic as my own heartbeat. They had tried to make me feel small by idolizing what I had chosen to conceal, but their disrespect had forced my hand, and in doing so had given me back my own name. I finally felt like I was sitting at my own table. The look on their faces, I wish I had a camera. It wasn't just shock, it was a complete system failure. It was the utter collapse of their entire understanding of the world. Robert's face went from confused to pale, to a blotchy red. Elinor looked like she'd been slapped, all the color drained from her face. The condescending smirks, the smug superiority, it all just melted away, leaving behind pure, unadulterated horror. And then something else flickered in their eyes, a sudden, desperate, sycophantic respect. They were looking at me, not as Benjamin, the disappointing son-in-law, but as the owner. I took my time. I took a final sip of my wine, placed the glass down gently, and stood up. I didn't walk over with a swagger. I walked calmly, slowly, the way Id always moved through their world. But now the weight of it was different. I approached their table. They were all staring at me. Frozen Robert's credit card was still sitting useless on the silver tray. I stopped by Sarah's chair. I placed a hand on her shoulder. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. But there was a smile playing on her lips. Then I looked at Robert and Alina. I didn't smirk. I didn't glare. I just looked at them with a calm, neutral expression. I hope you enjoyed the meal, I said. My voice was even quiet. The sea bass is a particular point of pride for us. I used the word us. I let it hang in the air. I didn't wait for a response. There wasn't one they could possibly give. I looked down at Sarah, ready to go. Honey. She stood up, took my arm, and we walked out. We didn't look back as we passed through the main doors. I caught the reflection in the glass. They were still sitting there, completely motionless, a tableau of utter defeat. The weight of 10 years of disrespect, of 1,000 tiny cuts, didn't just lift, it evaporated. It was gone, replaced by a quiet, solid certainty. We stepped out into the cool night air. Sarah squeezed my arm tightly. You bought the oak room, she whispered, a laugh in her voice. For 10 years, it was like this, a decade of subtle digs of conversations that would subtly shift. When I entered the room of family portraits, where I was always positioned on the very edge, like I could be cropped out later, without much trouble, Sarah saw it. She fought it constantly. She'd get into these quiet, tense arguments with her mother in the kitchen. I'd hear the low murmur of her voice, firm and angry, and Alina's calm, condescending replies. We're just thinking of you, darling. We want what's best. What was? I closed the deal 3 months ago. I said I was waiting for the right moment to tell you. I wanted it to be a surprise. She laughed, a real, genuine laugh that I hadn't heard in their presence for years. Oh, it was a surprise, she said. And as we walked to the car, the sounds of the city around us felt different. They felt like applause. True power, I realized, isn't about making noise. It's about the silence you choose to break. It's about knowing your own value so deeply that you never have to prove it to anyone until the moment you decide to. And then you only need to speak a single quiet sentence to change everything. The first time I walked into their house, I felt like I'd stepped onto a different planet. You know that feeling where the air itself is different. It was all high ceilings and polished floors that echoed with every step I took. My shoes, which I'd shined for hours, suddenly felt cheap and scuffed. My wife, Sarah, she squeezed my hand, a little anchor in that vast, silent space. Her parents were standing by the fireplace, a marble monstrosity that looked like it had been carved from a single block of ice. Her mother, Alina, was wearing a simple silk dress that probably cost more than my first car. Her father, Robert, had that kind of posture that makes you want to stand up straighter, a quiet authority that filled the room. They smiled. Of course, they were polite. But it was a cold politeness, the kind that's designed to keep you at a distance. I came from a different world. My dad was a mechanic, my mom a school secretary. We weren't poor, but we were careful. We valued things that lasted: a good pair of boots, a reliable car, a warm meal on the table. Their world was about appearances. It was about the right schools, the right clubs, the right kind of silence. They never said anything outright, not at first. It was all in the questions. What did your father do again? Robert would ask, already knowing the answer, his tone suggesting it was a curious, almost quaint profession. Oh, how interesting, Alina would say. When I mentioned my job in graphic design, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, so creative, she made it sound like a hobby. It was the little things, the constant reminders that I was an outsider, comments about my accent, which I never even knew I had, until they pointed it out. The way they'd suggest restaurants I'd never be able to afford, then watch me squirm. When the bill came, they paid for Sarah. Always they made it clear she was their responsibility, their daughter, and that I was just there, an accessory. They hadn't approved of. They believed with every fiber of their being that their daughter had married beneath her, that I was a drain on their family's legacy, a crack in their perfect facade. For years I just took it. I developed a thick skin. I learned to smile and nod, to let their comments wash over me. I loved Sarah, and she loved me, and that was the only thing that mattered. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't leave a mark. It wears you down, that constant quiet judgment. It makes you feel small in a way that's hard to describe. Then came the dinner. It was our anniversary, and Sarah was so happy. Her parents insisted on taking us out to celebrate. They chose La Siren. You've probably heard of it. It's one of those places where you need a reservation 6 months in advance, where the menu doesn't have prices, because if you have to ask, you can't afford it. I knew what this was. It was a power move, a deliberate setting of the stage for my humiliation. best in their eyes, was apparently a life without me in it. The restaurant was everything I expected: dark wood, soft lighting, waiters who moved like ghosts between the tables. The clink of crystal was the loudest sound in the room. We were seated at a prime table, and Robert ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than our monthly grocery bill. The conversation was the usual strained politeness, until the subject of the bill came up. Robert leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass. "Sarah, of course your mother. And I will cover your meal," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Then he turned his gaze to me. It was steady, completely calm. "I am sure you understand, Michael, that we can't be expected to subsidize your lifestyle. You'll be covering your own portion." There it was, the public demarcation, the line drawn in the sand right there on the crisp white tablecloth. Sarah started to protest, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. But I placed a hand on her arm. I just nodded. I gave him a small, quiet smile. "Of course, Robert, I wouldn't expect anything else. Because I knew something they didn't, a secret I'd been holding onto for a few weeks, a truth that was about to turn their entire world upside down. You see, a month earlier I'd received a letter from a law firm. I'd never heard of it. Concerned the estate of a man named Arthur Finley, my mother's father, my grandfather. He'd left my mother when she was a child, and she never spoke of him to us. He was a ghost, a name mentioned in hushed, sad tones. The letter asked me to come in for a reading of the will. My mother had passed away years ago, so I was the sole heir. I went expecting nothing, maybe a old watch or a small savings bond. The office was downtown, all leather and brass, smelling of old money and important documents. The lawyer, a serious man with kind eyes, explained everything. My grandfather hadn't abandoned us. He'd left to build something, to escape a life of poverty. And by the time he'd made his fortune, he felt too much shame to return. He'd spent his life building a restaurant empire, a small exclusive chain of places known for their quality and discretion, and he'd left it all to me, every last bit of it. The lawyer slid a folder across the desk. Inside were deeds, financial statements, portfolios. The numbers were staggering, and one of the names on the list of properties was Lausanne. So when Robert made his little speech about the bill, I just smiled. I knew the manager here. I'd met him during the transition meetings. His name was Mr. Albright. And right on cue, as if the universe had perfect timing, I saw him walking through the dining room doing his rounds. He was a tall, distinguished man in an impeccably tailored suit. His eyes scanned the room, and then they landed on me. There was a moment of recognition, a slight widening of his eyes. He changed course immediately and walked towards our table. Robert saw him coming and puffed out his chest, slightly, probably expecting a compliment on his wine choice or his status as a valued customer. But Mr. Albright walked right past him. He stopped next to my chair and gave a slight formal bow. "Mr. Evans," he said, his voice low and filled with genuine respect, "we had no idea you were dining with us this evening. My apologies for not greeting you personally upon your arrival." The table went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Robert's fork, which was halfway to his mouth, froze in midair. Eleanor's polite smile was stuck on her face, a brittle mask of confusion. The big incident, the one that led to the dinner, was their 50th wedding anniversary. A huge milestone, of course. Attendance was mandatory. Sarah was planning it with her mother for months. I offered to help to design the invitations. "Anything." Eleanor just patted my hand. "That sweet dear. But we have a professional handling all that." The venue was this incredibly exclusive old money restaurant downtown, the Oak Room. I'd heard of it. I'd just never been able to afford it, the kind of place where the waiters wear. I looked up at Mr. Albright. "It's quite all right, Charles. We were a last-minute booking. Everything is wonderful as always." "Thank you, sir," he said, and I could see the genuine pleasure in his eyes. "Is there anything at all we can do for you? Perhaps a bottle of the 45 Bordeaux we have in the cellar, complimentary, of course." That's when Robert found his voice. It was a sputter. "Really, Charles, what is the meaning of this? Do you know this man?" Mr. Albright turned to Robert, and his demeanor shifted from respectful to politely corrective. "Mr. Harrington, this is Michael Evans. He is the new owner of Lausanne and the entire Finley restaurant group." He let that hang in the air for a moment. "We are all quite literally working for him." The color drained from Robert's face. It was a slow, fascinating process, a wave of pale gray, washing away his usual ruddy confidence. Eleanor's hand flew to her chest. Sarah was looking at me, her eyes wide, with a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. "I'd kept the inheritance a secret from her too, wanting to process it all myself. Before sharing the news, I gave her a small apologetic shrug. Owner Robert managed to choke out, That's impossible, this establishment, this group, it's worth. It's worth quite a lot." Mr. Albright finished for him, his tone neutral. "The late Mr. Finley built an incredible legacy. We are all very grateful that Mr. Evans has chosen to continue it." He turned back to me. "Sir, again, my apologies for the interruption. Please, enjoy your evening. The bill naturally is on the house." And with another slight nod, he retreated, leaving us in a silence that was louder than any sound I'd ever heard. The shift was immediate and grotesque. Alina was the first to recover. Her entire face rearranged itself into a syrupy, sweet expression. "Michael, darling," she purred, "why didn't you tell us what a wonderful surprise it was?" As if the last 5 years of condescension had never happened. Robert was still struggling his mind, trying to recalibrate this new reality. "The Finley Group, your grandfather was Arthur Finley, but your background, your family. White gloves and a glass of water costs more than my entire lunch." I looked at him, and for the first time I didn't feel small. I felt a calm, powerful certainty. "That's the thing, Robert," I said, my voice. "Even you spent all this time judging my family, my background, without ever knowing what it was you valued: a name, a pedigree, a bank balance. You never valued character. You never valued the fact that I love your daughter, that I've built a good life with her through my own hard work. That was never enough for you, it was always about money. And now, by your own standards, I've won. Isn't that ironic?" He had nothing to say. He just stared at his plate, a broken man in a perfectly tailored suit. The rest of the meal passed in a blur. They tried to make conversation, to act as if everything was normal, but the foundation of their world had crumbled. The person they had looked down upon was now, in their own narrow terms, vastly superior to them. When the meal was finished and Mr. Albright brought the slip for me to sign, I took the leather folder from him. I looked at Robert, and "Alina, thank you for the invitation," I said. "But I insist on paying for everything." I signed the check with a flourish, a simple line that felt like signing a Declaration of Independence. I stood up, helping Sarah with her chair. She was still looking at me with wonder. I turned to my in-laws one last time. "Wealth isn't about what you own," I said, "it's about who you are." "For years you thought I was poor. But the real poverty was always in this room, at this table. It was in your inability to see past your own prejudice." I took Sarah's hand, and we walked out of the restaurant together. We didn't look back. The door closed behind us, shutting out the world of old money and older judgments. For the first time, I felt like I was finally truly walking on solid ground. This whole plan felt ridiculous at first. I'll be honest, putting on this cheap uniform, these stiff, uncomfortable shoes. But I had to know for myself. For years, my spouse would come back from family dinners, looking drained, putting on a brave face. And I'd hear the stories later, whispered in the dark, little comments from your mother about my career choices, your father's jokes about whether I could really provide for you. Always said, with a smile, "Of course. Always, when I wasn't there, you'd defend me, you always did. But it wore you down, I could see it." And they never ever said these things to my face. To me, I was the successful son-in-law, the one who'd done well. That's why I bought the restaurant group. It was an opportunity, yes, a good investment. But the main reason was this: it gave me a key, a way to see behind the curtain. I am the sole owner. But it's a silent ownership for now. The lawyers handled it. The management team reports to a trust. Even you don't know I wanted to tell you. But I needed to do this first. I needed to be sure. I picked this specific restaurant, their favorite spot, the place where they always hold court. I called the general manager a man. The whole week leading up to it, I had this knot in my stomach. I knew what was coming. It was going to be another performance, another evening of me sitting quietly, while Robert held court, talking about his golf handicap and his stock portfolio, making veiled comments about the economy, and how unfortunate it was for people without real pensions. Alina would flutter around, making sure everyone was served first, that my wine glass was always the last to be filled. They were masters of this kind of quiet, polite. Named David, and let him in on the plan. He thought I was insane. But the owner is the owner, so he set it up, a trial shift for a new waiter, just for one night, the night of their big family reservation. Walking into the staff entrance was like entering a different world. The noise, the heat from the kitchen, the frantic energy. David introduced me as the new guy, John. And the looks I got from the real waitstaff, They sized me up this older guy trying to start over. I didn't blame them. I felt like an imposter. I spent an hour shadowing a server named Maria, a whirlwind of efficiency, who had no patience for my fumbling. I learned the menu, the point-of-sale system, how to carry 3 plates at once. My heart was pounding the whole time. This was a terrible idea. What if I spilled wine on your aunt? What if I dropped a tray of food? The whole charade would be over. But then I saw the reservation list, their name, table 8, 7 o'clock. The show was on. I made sure I was the one to greet them. I stood by the hostess stand holding a stack of menus, my heart hammering against my ribs. And then the door opened. And there they were, your mother, in her usual elegant dress, your father looking self-important, your aunt and uncle trailing behind. They swept in like they owned the place. They didn't even look at me, just a vague expectation that someone would take their coats. I took your father's heavy overcoat. And he didn't even make eye contact, just shrugged it off while continuing to talk about the stock market. I led them to their table, the best one in the house, of course. I pulled out your mother's chair. She sat down without a word, just a slight dismissive nod. It was like I was part of the furniture, an automated piece of the scenery. That's when I saw it, the real them. The moment they thought no one who mattered was watching. Your father snapped his fingers to get my attention. Not a wave, a snap. You well need a bottle of the Silver Oak Cabernet. And don't bother with the glasses, just bring the bottle and leave it. I nodded right away, sir. As I turned, I heard your mother murmur, honestly, the help gets slower. Every time we come here, the help. That's what I was. I went to the bar, my hands shaking, not from nerves anymore, but from a cold building anger. This was what you had been dealing with, this casual, effortless disrespect. The dinner service was a masterclass in condescension. Every request was a complaint in disguise. The bread wasn't warm enough, the water had too much ice. Your mother sent her steak back twice, claiming it was overcooked, even though I saw the perfect pink center from the kitchen window. The chef was furious. And through it all I just smiled. I said my apologies. I said I'll see to it immediately. I was the perfect meek servant. And they loved it. It confirmed their place in the world right above people like me. Then came the moment that sealed everything. I was refilling their water glasses. Moving quietly beside the table, they were deep in conversation, forgetting I was there the way you forget a recording device. Your father took a long sip of wine and said, I still don't know what she sees in him, this entrepreneurial phase. Your mother sighed dramatically. It's a shame. She could have had Edward. The Clarksons are set for life. But no, she picks a man who plays with startups like they're toys. It's so unstable. I worry hell drag her down with him when it all inevitably falls apart. Cruelty, the kind that leaves no marks, so if you complain you just look paranoid. Your aunt chimed in. He's quiet, though doesn't say much, probably knows he's out of his depth. And your father laughed, a short harsh sound. Out of his depth. He's drowning, mark my words. In a year shall be back home. And well be picking up the pieces. I stood there, the water pitcher in my hand, frozen, hearing them tear me apart, dismiss our life, our marriage, with such casual cruelty. They weren't just rude to a waiter, they were contemptuous of the man their daughter loved. And they felt so safe, so insulated in their little bubble that they said it all right in front of me. I finished pouring the water, my hand steady now. The anger had crystallized into something else, resolve. The climax came with dessert. Your father finished his creme brulee and waved me over. He didn't look at me, just stared at his phone. This was mediocre at best. The service has been abysmal. We'd like to speak to the manager now. He said it with such finality, like a judge passing a sentence. I nodded, a small, tight smile on my face. Of course, sir, I'll fetch him immediately. I walked back to the office where David was waiting. He saw my face and knew it was time. I took off the cheap bow tie, the awful vest. I slipped into the suit jacket I'd brought, the one tailor-made in London. I fixed my hair, took a deep breath, and looked in the mirror. I wasn't John the waiter anymore, David. And I walked out together through the kitchen, past the curious stares of the staff. The restaurant seemed to hush as we moved through it. We approached table 8. Your family was still muttering amongst themselves, complaining, preparing their list of grievances for the manager. David stopped at the head of the table. Your father looked up, ready to launch into his speech. But David spoke first, his voice calm and clear. Mr. and Mrs. Albright, you wish to speak to a manager. I am David Walsh, the general manager. But I believe you've already met the owner. I stepped forward. I looked your father directly in the eyes. I watched the recognition dawn. It was slow, then all at once his face, usually so smug and composed, went slack with shock. His jaw actually dropped open. Your mother's hand flew to her mouth. The color drained from her face, leaving her expertly applied makeup Standing out in stark garish contrast, your aunt looked like shed scene. A ghost. The silence at the table was absolute, heavier than any noise in the busy restaurant. "Hello, Robert Eliner," I said, my voice, even cutting through the silence. "I understand you had some concerns about your service tonight." Your father stammered. What is this? What are you wearing?" He was pointing a trembling finger at my waiter's shirt, still visible under my jacket. "This," I said, glancing down. "This was my uniform for the evening. I wanted to get a Hansen feel for the business. And what an illuminating experience it was." I let my gaze travel around the table, meeting each of their horrified eyes. "For instance, I learned that the bread is never warm enough, that there's too much ice in the water. And I learned, most importantly, what you truly think of me." I leaned forward, just slightly resting my knuckles on the table. "I was right here, Robert, when you said I was drowning. And you, Eliner, when you lamented that your daughter didn't marry poor stable Edward Clarkson. I heard every word. The help has excellent hearing, you see. The night of the anniversary, I put on the best suit I own. Sarah looked beautiful. She squeezed my hand in the car. Just ignore them tonight. It's for a few hours. It's for me. And I was fully prepared to just endure it. To be the quiet, insignificant presence in the corner. For one more night to let them have their victory." The attempts to backtrack were pathetic. Your mother forced a horrible, strained laugh. "Oh, darling, you misunderstood. We were just joking. We're so proud of you." "The service was wonderful, truly." Your father was nodding vigorously, a desperate panicked motion. Yes, a test. We were testing the staff. You have a wonderful team here." "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm, silencing them. "The test is over. And you failed." I straightened up. "This behavior, this two-faced, disrespectful gossip, ends now. It ends tonight. You will not speak about me, or to my wife, with anything less than complete respect. Your access to our lives, to our future children, is now a privilege, one that I will revoke in an instant if I ever hear a whisper of this kind of nonsense again. Do I make myself perfectly clear?" The humiliation on their faces was more satisfying than any business deal I'd ever closed. They were shrunken, exposed. The illusion of their superiority had shattered, and they were just left sitting there, small and foolish. I didn't wait for an answer. I turned to David. "Please comp their meal and see them out." Then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I went upstairs to the owner's office, a quiet wood-paneled room overlooking the dining room. I stood at the window and watched as David presented the bill marked paid. I saw them get up, shuffling, not looking at each other. They gathered their coats and left, scuttling out into the night like startled crabs. The victory wasn't in the money or in owning the restaurant. It was in finally holding up a mirror and forcing them to see their own reflection. It was in taking back the power they had wielded through whispers and sly comments. For years, I had to become a waiter to learn the truth, but the real ownership I claimed tonight wasn't over a business, it was over the truth itself. And that was a price they could never afford to pay. For years, I watched it happen. I saw the way his mother's smile would tighten when he walked into a room, how his father's eyes would skim right over him to greet someone else. It was a quiet violence, a death by 1,000 tiny cuts. And I was the only one who ever seemed to notice the blood. After every holiday, every forced family gathering, we'd drive home, in a silence that was heavier than any argument. I'd reach over and hold his hand, my thumb tracing circles on his skin, and he'd just stare out the window. The streetlights would flash across his face, and I could see the hurt he worked so hard to hide from them. He never complained. He'd just say, "That's just how they are." But I saw the toll it took. I saw the way he'd shrink just a little each time, believing their silent narrative that he was the least successful, the least impressive, the one who hadn't lived up to the family name. My love for him burned brighter with every slight they delivered. It wasn't just affection anymore, it was a protective, furious flame. I made a promise to myself right there in the passenger seat on those dark drives home that I would find a way to show him his true worth, to give him a moment where he couldn't possibly doubt it. And then the opportunity came, a silent, secret opportunity. I'd been working on a business deal for over a year, a huge acquisition that was entirely my own, a legendary restaurant, the very one his family had always talked about as the pinnacle of fine dining, a place they reserved for only their most important celebrations. The ink was dry, the papers were signed, and not a soul knew, except my lawyer and me. I held onto this secret, not as a possession, but as a weapon I was carefully sharpening. Right moment, it was our secret shield, our future, and I knew exactly how I would use it. I wasn't going to just buy the place, I was going to give it to him. I put the deed in his name as an early anniversary gift. He was on paper the sole owner, he just didn't know it, yet I was waiting for the perfect stage. And as fate would have it, his family decided to build it for me.